We are live. Fun fact, we are for YouTube, we're like the second highest streamed YouTube channel. There's a Call of Duty channel that's here. We're like right below it, you know.
It's very competitive.
Yeah, I mean we are neck and neck with Minecraft, live Minecraft Twitch streams about how popular.
I might have believed you if you've been like in the hierarchy of public boards. Like it's like common council and then like us.
Take that historic resource.
Yeah.
You and your 6 viewers. 5 of them are you at the meeting. I mean, we're live now, so they don't call them.
It's a challenge. Challenge to all municipal boards. Who can get the most YouTube viewers.
Yeah. Just wait till that broadband board meets next. Show them what for. Yeah, contracted supply. I'll shut that down too. Yeah, I've seen the ratings. Oh, Jeff is downstairs, but the doors are locked.
Open the door, but hopefully there's no hands.
On the dance or the bed.
Someone filled it for me.
Live streaming.
You have the dance section coming up. So we'll give you a moment to get settled. Then we'll open up our.
And then just for the mics, there's the push button on it.
Oh, yes.
To turn it on when you're speaking.
Yep. All right, why don't we get started? Welcome members of the public who are joining us in person and live streaming on YouTube as well. I'm Martin Daly, I'm the chair of the City of Albany Board of Zoning Appeals. We have one case before us tonight we'll be discussing, and the public workshop portion of the agenda, which actually this is just for a public workshop. It is a substitution application for 64 Colvin Avenue. The proposal is conversion of an existing building and legal non-conforming uses into a self-storage facility. The way that this will work, we'll have staff walk us through the application. I believe since this is a rather complex case, we'll have the opportunity to ask the applicant some questions and get some narrative for the case to be able to complete the record for this. And then we as a board can certainly discuss the case and any materials we may wish to see or questions we want to have put on the record before the case goes to anticipated public hearing for its public review. So with that, I will turn it over to staff to walk us through the site and the request by the applicant.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the information. So the application for us tonight is 64 Colvin Avenue. The applicant is the Burke Companies. The zoning district is the MUCU, Mixed Use Community Urban, and the MUCH, Mixed Use Community Highway. I'll just note that the majority of the property is within the MUCU district. The proposal is to convert the existing building and legal non-conforming uses into self-storage facility. And the specific request is under the substitution to allow for the substitution of 5 prior legal non-conforming uses, which include car sales, car repair, car wash, convenience store, and a gas station, with a different non-conforming use, which will be a self-storage facility. Here you can just see a photo of the site, and then on the upper right-hand side, outlined in the red is the parcel that we're discussing. And then on the lower right-hand corner, you see where it is in relation to the rest of the city. And just for some context, there are some additional photos that were provided by the applicant. This is on the photo on the left would be taken from Fuller, Colvin rather, sorry. And then the other photo is the rear of the building. And here you see where there was previously, I believe this was the area where there were repair shops and a car wash on the right-hand side. So I'll just go over the actual code and what it specifies under the USDO. So for substitutions, no non-conforming use may be converted to a different non-conforming use unless the Board of Zoning Appeals determines that the alternative use is in the same or less intense land use category based on table 375.302.1, which is the permitted use table. An alternative use may only be found to be in the same or less intense land use category if it is a listed use in the permitted use table and is allowed in all zones with the same or fewer conditions than the prior legal non-conforming use. So for further context, this is the permitted use table. Now, I've just selected the uses that we're discussing for tonight, so it doesn't have all the permitted uses in the entire table. Additionally, it's only starting with the mixed use and special purpose zoning districts because none of these would be allowed in the residential districts. So this is just to give some general context, and then the way to read it would be anything that P is a permitted use or permitted as of right. As a C, it's a conditional use would require conditional use permit. A would be an accessory use, has to be secondary to something else, principal use. In this case, there are no temporary uses here. So I don't know if there's any questions from any of the BZA members at this point.
I'll jump in and ask a question as it relates to staff and council's interpretation. When we go back to that standard for a substitution, there's a couple of qualifiers there. There's 2 sentences I wanna zero in on. The first one is that the alternative use is in the same or less intense land use category based on table 375.302.1. If we go back to the table, the way that I'm reading categories are those lines or those rows, if you will, that are highlighted in to commercial and industrial use, and they're categories of the zoning district table. That's my interpretation of how we define a category. In the classic sense that a category would be residential, a category would be commercial, a category would be industrial, and then there are subcategories within them. I'm reading this as a self-storage facility is within the commercial services subcategory of industrial uses, and that the 5 prior uses are all within the subcategory of commercial uses. And I know that's a statement pointing out the obvious, but my understanding is the way that section 375.506.4D is written is that they're referring to categories in those general classifications as commercial and industrial. And so maybe I'm jumping ahead of the presentation, but I kind of would like some input from staff and council as to whether they consider a land use category to be those same super categories, if you will, of commercial and industrial.
So staff's opinion on this kind of varies just as it's not defined specifically in the USDO. So for many terms, we can just refer to the definitions. Unfortunately, we don't have that here. So I think that is one of the questions kind of posed to the BZA to determine is if, as Martin's pointing out, is that the way that the BZA wants to, define the land use category? I think that's certainly an appropriate approach. It does appear that the commercial uses, as an example, would be the land use category, and you have a subcategory of retail. But that is up to the BZA to kind of determine as you move forward with the rest of the application.
My three-legged stool of being on the BZA is I want to be able to have a complete application with a full set of facts. So we're making decisions that we feel that we can be, we have all the available data to us. The second one is to make a decision that's defensible, that would survive a challenge. And the third one is to be fair, to consider the balancing tests between, weighing the benefit to the applicant versus the detriment to the community. So that's the way I'm looking at this particular case, like I look at every other case. And I want to make sure that as we're going through this, when we're collecting our facts, that we have a good understanding of the interpretation of uses as they relate back to the table. Because one of my fears is setting a precedent where if we move forward, we're interpreting uses between categories in the land use category table, it could be interpreted that the definitions are going back to intensive uses within those categories, and all of a sudden we see applications coming forward for substitutions of industrial uses and residential zones, so to speak. I want to make sure that if we make a decision on this, that we have a defensible decision, so we're not setting precedent for substitutions all over.
Yeah, that would just be the other note from staff, is that this would set a precedent either way, just in terms of how the substitution provisions here would be applied to any future cases. So I think it's, for the BZA to determine if that's the appropriate way to categorize it, and then also applying those standards, how you're applying this section to the application in front of you.
Yeah, and the second element, and then I'm going to shut up, is the second sentence where it says if it's listed in the permitted use table and is allowed in all zones with the same or fewer conditions. There are much fewer conditions placed upon it, but it is allowed in fewer zones. So that's kind of wonky the way that's written and the way I'm reading it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely agreement that this section of the code could be written in a manner that's more clear and provides more guidance to the BZA and staff on how to apply it to any application. This is really the end of what I have, because I think it's important to make those determinations that Martin's kind of getting at before we can really dive into the application. I don't know if you want any specific information from the applicant at this point, or if you want to discuss anything beforehand.
Do you guys, before I steal the oxygen, want to ask any questions?
Yeah.
Because my first question is, well, we're referring to 5 legal non-conforming uses. When's those uses are currently not in continuous operation, and maybe the gas station, I'm just going by driving by and seeing prices. But are the other uses still in effect, and have they lost their grandfather status because they haven't been kept up?
Yep.
So that's the question I have.
Okay, yeah, to the best of my knowledge, the gas station is the only thing that's currently functioning. I believe all the other things are vacant, but I think that'd be a question for the applicant to address in terms of the last time these specific uses were in use.
To my knowledge.
Hi, sorry, thanks for having us. Andy Brick from the Brick Law Firm, with Tom Burke, principal of the.
If you wouldn't mind sitting at that table, just because the sound will come out in there.
I forget to turn on the microphone. Nobody's on Zoom saying you're muted.
Hi, Andy Brick from the Brick Firm. On behalf of the applicant, with me is Tom Burke, principal of the Burke Companies, and Jared George, principal of Tri-Capital Realty. We are the contract vendees to purchase this property. Albany did a great job of explaining what we're looking to do. Put it very simply, we're looking to take 5 existing uses, 4 of which are non-conforming, and convert them with a substitution with your approval to one non-conforming use, which we are prepared to demonstrate in a defensible manner that will be much less intense than the current use of the property. It's the Armory Garage property, 64 Colvin. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. To answer some of the questions that you raised, we too had the same questions about that language. I think wonky is an excellent way to describe it.
It's a polite way.
I had a pretty extensive conversation with Brad Glass, the planning commissioner, and we worked through that, and he explained to me that his view of the commercial services category, not comparing commercial to industrial, because as you had mentioned, Euclidean zoning, there's a presumption that industrial is more intense than commercial. We will overcome that presumption for you, just by one brief example. A retail convenience store is allowed in commercial use, and that generates 49 trips an hour vehicles, where self-storage generates less than one. So the fact that traditional Euclidean principles would say commercial to industrial, you're going more intense, but we will show that based upon the specific uses and the subcategories that are listed, we do meet that definition. I agree it could do some work, but we will demonstrate that to you. In terms of the existing uses, we are in the process of purchasing the property. The existing tenant is in the process of vacating. But I can state and will provide for the record at the public hearing that all of the uses have been operational in at least the last 12 months.
Okay.
We're hoping not to have to go back in and reactivate them. If we were able to obtain a substitution, we can then go right to self-storage and they could all be extinguished. Again, to go back to Euclidean zoning, because I don't have that much opportunity to discuss this with people who actually understand the term. As I'm sure you all know, the purpose of a non-conforming use and the intent behind a non-conforming use is to eventually eliminate it and bring the property into compliance with a conforming use. We're not at that point yet, but we are at the point where we can take 5 existing uses that are non-conforming. Actually 4, because convenience retail is still allowed, but that's not what we want to do with that size of a building. So we eliminate 4 and go down to 1. We eliminate 5 uses that really don't work on the property and go down to 1. So we do think we are achieving steps towards that theory behind the eventual elimination of non-conforming uses. But we will demonstrate for the record that they all have been active within the last 12 months.
One of the things, and I'm glad you mentioned teasing that on the application, because there's certainly questions we're going to see about demonstrating how you believe that this is a less intense use than what's currently on the property. Sure. One of the other things that we struggle with is we are a judicial body. So we don't make the law. The council, and I'm sure you know this, but the council makes the law and has established the standards for this particular zone. One of the things that concerns me is that when the new zoning maps were adopted in December 2021, self-storage was a use that was particularly carved out of this zone for allowable use. So one of my concerns as we move this application forward, and certainly I want to speak to folks that are in the neighborhood and the person who represents this district in council, is I want to make sure that as we're considering this case, that we are not usurping the council's legal requirement to establish the zoning for the district. And we're not substituting their authority, making our determination.
Understood. And anticipating that concern that you would have, if you look at the supplemental narrative that I submitted, I touch upon that briefly, and we'll expand upon it at the public hearing for the record. But when you look at the MUCU, clearly the intent behind that zoning district is to create a more urban type, pedestrian-friendly, downtown type environment with a street wall, as evidenced by the fact that the setback is a maximum of 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind the zone is to move everything up to the street, which I don't disagree with. Except on this property, I don't know that it really fits at this particular property. The idea of bringing a street wall to Central and Colvin to comply with the zoning on this property probably isn't realistic, and I would submit that this particular property is unique, and it probably wasn't the type of property they were contemplating when they were contemplating bringing a street wall along Colvin, because everything else is pretty close to the street as you go up Colvin. We have this existing building that we are trying to repurpose and reuse rather than just knock it down, clear out the asbestos and the lead, knock it down. We're trying to repurpose it and reuse it, and we think we can demonstrate that we will be doing that in a manner that's less intense than what's there now. But I understand the concern, because clearly this time last year, self-storage was allowed as a conditional use, and now it's not. So we recognize that. We're prepared to address that.
And I think as part of the application, speaking about anything you may have explored to construct or use the property in a conforming manner would help supplement the record.
Okay, sure. Very good.
Do you guys have questions, comments?
Thank you. I'm just mulling it over still.
Oh, speak as you think, that's fine.
That's
Sometimes it doesn't come out right.
how you control
Yeah. What if you mix Coke and Pepsi together?
Throw Mentos in
Yeah.
What was it that you put in? This question isn't for the applicant. I think, Avi, if you'll humor me a bit. If you could go to, I believe it was slide 2 that has our maps. Sorry to make you pull it back up.
No problem.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, this parcel is actually within 2 different zones. So if you could go to the table now, so some of these uses are permitted within one portion of the parcel, but not in others. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And we estimate it's about 12% of the building that is in the MUCH, where self-storage is allowed.
And is the idea, and maybe I'm jumping a little ahead right now, but is the idea that the self-storage would be within this existing facility, or would it be a new?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The idea is to repurpose the building. That building is an albatross. The idea of demolishing it really drove us to find an adaptive reuse that would be palatable to the neighborhood and to the code. That's where we landed upon self-storage. And it's good, the way it's structured, it's well designed for a self-storage facility, which would all be internal.
Where would that leave the gas station?
Out.
So that would be removed as part of that.
Correct.
Where is this with planning? I mean, with the planning board? Still with us to be able to determine.
Yeah, it has nothing's gone to
Okay.
the planning board at all. And we would kind of need to settle things here first, determine, if anything would actually need to go to the planning board, what,
And
what
it
triggers
would
there would be.
county planning board because of the state route, there's a
Yeah.
lot of boxes here, so.
Yeah, this was not, this particular application did not go to county planning board just because of the unique.
We need to take action,
type it is.
but I'm wondering if it's started to go to that level where they've seen it and have questions about it too, but okay. All right, I've asked all my questions, I jump right out front, so. I don't have any more questions, so, public hearing for this would be next month, at which time you'll communicate with the applicant about some of the questions we have, and
Yep, yes, we'll certainly follow up with the applicant. The public hearing would be November 2nd.
and then that time, Avi will work with you to supplement the record as far as the
Sure,
application. And we can move to that phase in the process.
Great.
So, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
nice to meet you guys.
You guys.
Look forward to working with you, and we'll find out more. So with that, do we have any more business? Otherwise, in my shameless plug, CDRPC has a planning and zoning workshop on October 28th. There are other workshops available. New York State Department of State has a training series, but if you're looking for credits, planning and zoning board members are required to get 4 hours of training per year. Accredited training, we do offer that opportunity to be at Hudson Valley Community College. That'll be on Friday, October 28th, and we have a series of sessions related to, we'll have a law update, ethics, series about sustainability and stormwater. So shameless plug for that opportunity to get your training hours. Other than that, I guess I'll conclude do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion
All
to
right.
adjourn.
All in favor of adjournment?
You're a second.
All right, adjourn the meeting. Sorry, I know that was like rather abrupt transition, but